Today I want to share with you the secret that I learned from the creator of Kiro himself on how he approaches building web apps using the Kiro Agentic coding assistant. So most people use AI tools in this way. They'll write the prompt and then let it generate the code and then test it, see if it works, and you'll see that lots of things don't work. And then they'll reprompt it, fix it, try to fix it, keep prompting and fixing, keep prompting and fixing, debugging until they eventually give up or they finally maybe get to the solution. But today I want to share with you a different strategy, the strategy I learned directly from the creator of Kiro, which involves spec-driven development in this way. You really spend 80% of your time up front in the spec and plan mode itself so that you really get full clarity, full details, and full accuracy of exactly what you want to build, full alignment in markdown files, in your requirements, design, documents, and then let Kiro do the rest. So I'm going to combine this with agent skills. So today we're going to do spec-driven development the way that the creator of Kiro would do it, and implement agent skills on top of that so that we can really make sure our specs are fully aligned, and then we can just let it run and build a web app. So let's take a look at how that looks like. I'm going to go ahead and pivot to this blog. So you can follow along by checking out this blog that I have written, and it has all the resources that you need that I'll be using in this particular demo. So first off, in this blog, there's going to be a download Kiro link. You can just go ahead and click on that. Download Kiro if you don't have it already. Kiro is an agentic coding assistant. So let's take a look at the flow. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a new window in Kiro. Open up a project, and in this case, a project is just going to be a folder. So in my desktop, I'll just create a new folder, front-end project. Let's just do that. Create front-end project, and then open. All right, so I have an empty project folder here, and in this project, I'm going to go ahead and do spec-driven development so that I can really get all the details fully fleshed out and spend 80% of my time really making sure that the plan is fully accurate and aligned with what I really want. And then I'll let Kiro run the rest. I'll apply agent skills along the way so that it implements best practices from Vercel and also from UI design. So let's take a look. All right, so let's say in this blog that I have here, what we're gonna do is we're going to first incorporate some agent skills. And really what I wanna do is, let's say I wanna create a portfolio website. So I'll start with my prompt. And in Kiro, in the chat window, you can do the spec mode. This is what will allow you to generate lots of the requirement documents up front. So I'm gonna ask it, okay, so this is my prompt to Kiro. I want to build a blog website so that I can share all my technical knowledge every time I learn something new. And let's just see what it does, right? So I'm gonna press enter, that's my prompt. And from this prompt, it's going to ask me a couple of questions. All right, so now Kiro is gonna ask me if I want to build a feature, fix a bug, or a quick plan. So I'm gonna tell it I wanna build a feature and then submit my answer. I will go ahead with the recommended requirements and submit answer. All right, so now what it's going to do is generate a requirements document that outlines all the features that this app should have and how it should implement. So now it's generating the requirements document where it outlines all the features that the app should have in the form of user stories. So let's take a look at what that looks like once it's done. It's currently refining all the requirements in this document to make them more precise and testable so that a coding agent can actually accurately ensure that these requirements have been built and implemented. And in order to do that, it needs to write it in a certain way in English so that it's very testable language that is very precise and to the point and testable by an agent. So it does this for you. I think of this stage as, imagine all of the prompt engineering best practices that research has covered. Kiro will implement all of that prompt engineering best practices for you so that it actually generates a document with the language and wording structured in such a way that it implements all the prompt engineering best practices so that the agent has less guesswork and more accuracy in how it implements those features and requirements. Okay, cool. So now the requirements document has been generated. Let's take a look at what it looks like. It creates a folder called .kiro. This is where the specs live. So let's take a look at the requirements.md. And I'm just gonna make my screen a little bit bigger here, and let's take a look. So as you can see, there's a glossary of the types of words that I'll be using to define different parts of my app. So it wants to be aligned in terms of the vocabulary we're going to be using in how we're going to be describing different parts and pages and features of the app so that we're all on the same page. It's important that the LLM understands what you're saying, and in order to understand what you're saying, it's generated a glossary to make sure it's understanding the different components that are involved. So blog system, the overall technical blog website application, content editor, so allows you to create and edit blog posts, post renderer, displaying blog posts to readers, tag manager, search engine, author, reader, right? These are technical words and glossary. But now let's take a look at the requirements. So these requirements in software development lifecycle, we call them user stories. So a user story is just a feature written in such a way that it really gets granular into the exact feature that a user might expect to work in a certain way. So in this case, as an author, I want to create new blog posts with rich technical content so that I can share my knowledge as I learn new things. Now, how can this feature be verified that it's working properly? That's the acceptance criteria. And some acceptance criteria, I'll read one here. When the author submits a new post with the title and body, the content editor, and the content editor is a vocabulary term from here, the component responsible for creating and editing blog posts, it shall save the post, assign it a unique identifier, and record the publication date. So that's a very granular feature and acceptance criteria for that feature that is very testable. So it generates a bunch of that for this blog website. And then from there, I can ask it, okay, so let's generate the design document. So the requirements are all the features and user stories and acceptance criteria, but the design document is gonna be talking about how we're gonna implement those features and acceptance criteria, how we're gonna, like what stack we're gonna use, what language we're gonna use. So let's take a look at that. I'm gonna go ahead and generate tech design. And fun fact, so far I've only used 11 credits. When you install Kiro, you initially get 50 credits for free every single month. It'll get replenished each month. At the first of each month, you'll get 50 credits. So this is enough to do this particular demo for free. So highly recommend you try it out. There's no risk involved at all. So we'll get back to you once the design document has been generated, and then we'll go over it.
I have no clue. You just have them. We have this. She probably does that. Do you make it?
Come on. All right, so the design document has been generated now. Let's take a look at what it looks like, and we'll go over the components that it covers. All right, so the design document is going to be an evolvement from the requirements document. It's going to take those requirements and then structure out how it's going to generate that application in terms of more technical jargon, more specific granular ways of describing the implementation of those features that it's going to do. So here, I'm just going to open this design document in preview mode, right click on the tab, open preview, so that it's easier to read, especially when there's tables here in a markdown file. So yeah, key technology choices, framework, it's defaulting to Next.js as the framework that it's going to use. And I can always tell it otherwise. So the purpose of the spec-driven development workflow is really not just to agree with everything that is generated, but to do a full, thorough review of this. And this is what the creator of Kiro recommends. You're spending most of your time up front really reviewing this document and making sure it aligns with what you want to do. So the architecture of the app in terms of the router and the components on the front end, and then also the data layer is described here. The request flow, how the app is gonna flow in terms of the data that it's handling, how it's gonna get from the database to the front end and from the front end to the database. And then even some code snippets in terms of how it's gonna define some of the data models, like post, create post input, update post input. So these are some TypeScript interfaces that it's defining. So keep in mind, this is being generated by Claude Opus 4.6, as you can see on my screen here, Claude Opus 4.6. So this is a very intelligent model when it comes to coding assistance. It's already trained on lots of coding best practices. However, it doesn't know everything. And maybe some of the experts from the world who know React and Next.js from the past years of experience working in production systems, maybe they might have some input to chime into that the agent can implement. These are best practices and guidance from the engineers that created Next.js and React. So how can I get my agent to know all of these standards? Well, that's where agent skills comes in. So agent skills, and the agent skills that I'm going to be using are going to be the React best practices and also UI design, so that it has best practices for how the UI is going to be designed. So let's take a look at the blog again. And in the blog, you'll see this section called agent skills, and these are the skills that I'll be using. So React best practices, I'll click on this URL. It'll take me to a GitHub page. And in this GitHub page, this is actually created by Vercel Labs, and these are the experts when it comes to Next.js and React. So I trust their best practices and guidance, and they've formulated all of their best practices and guidance in the form of an agent skill, which is an open source standard. And what I'll do is I'll click on the skill.md file. Let's take a look at that. So here are some of the priority best practices that they recommend that oftentimes an LLM agent might overlook and forget to implement. Eliminating waterfalls, server-side performance, optimizing performance, and some advanced patterns, right? So, and then there's other files involved. So for example, like how to handle asynchronous calls. Maybe there's some best practices that the agent might not immediately apply right away that the Vercel Labs team really knows that the agent should apply right away. So it references some other docs within the skills repo. For example, if I go back, you can see some of those other docs here in rules. And let's take a look at one, for example, like async parallel for when asynchronous operations have no interdependencies. So if there's asynchronous operations that can operate at the same time without impacting one another, what's the best practice for implementing that type of code in React and Next.js? Well, it shows something like this. This is incorrect. And this is a commonly used implementation right here that you can see. But this is an incorrect implementation, and they actually recommend doing a promise.all here. So perfect. So let's take a look at how we can implement these agent skills. So let's go back to where I was. Yeah, and I'm going to go to the skill.md file, copy the URL, and in Kiro, I'm going to import this agent skill so that my Kiro Agentic Assistant can actually incorporate all these best practices into the specs themselves. So I'm going to copy this URL, and in Kiro, I'm going to go back to Kiro, click on the ghost icon on the left panel here, and you'll see a section called Agent Steering and Skills right here. So Agent Steering and Skills. In here, I'll click on the plus icon and then choose Global Agent Skills. This just means that I'll apply these agent skills so that they're available to use in all of my projects. And I like to have them available in all my projects because a lot of my projects are going to have front-end interface. So Global Agent Skills, and then import the skill from GitHub. And here, this is where you'll paste the URL to the skill.md file that you want to import. I'll press enter. Since I already have it, it'll ask me if I want to overwrite it. But if it's your first time, it'll just import it right away. And then you should see this skill.md file here, imported right here. So then that skill, I have a lot of skills imported here, but this one is going to be called React Best Practices. So Vercel React Best Practices. So right here, Vercel React Best Practices. So I would use this skill to help me refine my spec. So here's what the creator of Kiro recommends doing. One thing is definitely go over the full requirements document, which I'm going to pull up right here in the design document. And in this design document, really the goal is to fully look through this and make sure it's aligned with what you want. And if you don't know the language that's being used for this app, it's okay. Then you can just kind of read whatever you can that does make sense, that you can understand, like slug generation rules, convert title to lowercase, right? These are some things that you can align with just by telling Kiro, okay, I want it this way, I want it that way. So you'd be basically reviewing over all of this. But then I'll tell it to implement that best practices skill. So actually one more skill I want to import. You'll do the same process for this skill as well, the UI design. So right here, there's a UI design for making something have better looking UI interfaces, not just the typical agent generated UI that you'll see everywhere. So this skill, I'll also import this. I'll copy the URL of the skill.md file, and I'll do the same process. Click on the ghost icon, agent steering and skills, click on the plus icon, global agent skills, import skill from GitHub, paste it, enter, and then it'll be imported as well. And this skill is called UI design, which I'll see right here. So how am I gonna apply that? So I'm gonna say use Vercel React best practices, and UI design skills to review over the specs and update them so they follow the relevant. So I'll say use, and then I'll use a slash command to activate my skill, and then I'll type in the name of the skill, like Versatile React Best Practices, and then slash UI design skills to review over the specs and update them so that they follow the relevant best practices for this project. And then I'll press enter. And now let's see what's really going on underneath the hood. So it's going to load up all of those files from those skill folders that we just saw on GitHub and all the best practices that are outlined there. And it's going to load it up into the context window temporarily. And with that information, it's going to look at our specs for the technical blog, like the requirements and design, and it's going to update these documents accordingly so that the requirements and design are also coherent and aware and implementing the best practices and guidance from these skills that I have imported. That way, my specs are a lot more tuned in, my specs are a lot more accurate, and there's a lot less room for error when it comes to what the agent has to decide on what to do with these requirements and design. As you can see, it activated some of the skills right here. And after it activated the skills, it's gonna read through my specs, and then let's take a look at what it does. All right, let's see what happens. It's editing the design document right now. Sometimes you might see it running into an error, but it'll automatically fix the error that it's running into by itself. It's an agentic loop. Perfect. So let's just see what it's doing. All right, it looks like it's updated. So I can actually see the diff from what we previously had to what we now have since the last prompt that I just submitted. So let's take a look at the diff. Right here, 4 changes accepted, and I can see the view all changes. So yeah, this green right here is really the new stuff that was added after I incorporated agent skills into the spec-driven development workflow. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Yeah, it has applied some performance architecture best practices here. Wrap post content, so for the blog post content, tag sidebar and search results in independent suspense boundaries to enable streaming. Okay, cool. Parallel data fetching on the post list page, fetch posts and tags in parallel via promise.all. Cool, so look, it's applying some of these best practices in the context of the app that I want to build, and it's just cohesively aligning those best practices with what I wanted and in my design document, everything that's listed there, and it's turning it into one cohesive document that has all of those integrations of those best practices. Same with the UI design and direction, right? It talks about font body, font mono, right? The different types of font, that's best practice, spacing unit, so really so that it's easier for people to read, web accessibility, typography, layout structure. So a lot more details have been incorporated into my specs now, and I can now trust that the specs have a lot less blind spots when it comes to potential bugs that might come up, potential issues in terms of performance, and maybe some accessibility issues. It's going to mitigate a lot of those because I have implemented agent skills into the mix. Perfect. So in an ideal setting, you'd also review all of this and make sure you're fully aligned with that. And then, yeah, let's take a look at the design doc. And then I can just tell it here, if I just go like this. Here, let me just click on here. There's a continue button here. I can also close out the chat. Yeah, there's a continue button here and generate tasks. So I'll tell it to generate the tasks now off of this design document. What it's going to do is it's going to generate step-by-step tasks on exactly the code to generate, the files to generate, in what order, and which parts of the app it should generate at the same time using sub-agents. It's gonna figure all that out and generate a task list for us, and actually for the agent to execute on. So we'll meet back up once the tasks list is generated. Also, if you're creating a website that's gonna have pictures and images in there, you can upload those pictures and images into your workspace, and it'll incorporate those as assets to put into the website. So if it's like a portfolio website and you want your headshot there, you can upload a photo of your headshot in a folder in this workspace, and also let it know in the prompt during the spec-driven development stage. And then you'll see that it will incorporate those assets into the website that you're building. All right, so the task list is complete now. So let's take a look at the task list. So this is a list of all tasks for the agent to complete. and there's these Thunderbolt icons. You can click on them to let it execute a task, or you can just run all the tasks. There's a button right here. Let me close out the chat window by pressing this button again. You can click run all tasks and then just let it run. And we can actually trust the run all tasks button because we assume that we've spent a lot of time up front in generating the specs and being fully detailed and aligned and clear as to our expectations for what this app should look like, what features it should have, and what it should do in the process. So I'll click run all tasks, and there's two options: run all tasks that are required, or run the required and optional tasks. Optional tasks involve more property-based testing, so that it actually does more unit testing and more thorough testing of each features. So some of those are like optional tasks. I'll just do run required and optional tasks. Now, one thing to keep in mind though, when it's building an app, one of the first tasks is to initialize a project, like a Next.js project, for example. When that happens, there's a CLI command that it's going to use for Next.js, and that's going to open up its own little prompt window that's separate from the agent prompt. So I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. Because this is a part that usually trips people up, because the agent will wait and it won't go to the next task until you give it some input about the project setup. Cool. It looks like it's running task 1.1, which is to initialize a Next.js project with TypeScript, Tailwind, CSS, and core dependencies. So let's see what that looks like. And by the way, if I go through this task list, you'll see that some of these tasks are mapped to requirements from the previous doc, requirements doc, right? So these tasks are going to fulfill these requirements, and so on. And also at the bottom of your, notice my terminal window just came up out of nowhere, right? This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about some input that is going to be asked of you when creating a new project. So usually in one of the earlier tasks, that's where it's going to happen. So here in my terminal, it has popped up without me having done anything, because Kiro actually opened up the terminal for us and then ran this command for npx create next app. That's the command to create a Next.js project. And I actually have to say yes in order to say it's okay to proceed with this particular app. So type Y, press enter. Perfect. Okay, so I'll say yes. All right, so now it's installing some of these dependencies. And really, it wouldn't have been able to move forward until I had confirmed the yes there in the terminal. And that's it. That's spec-driven development. And once you let all of your tasks run, I'll show you what the finished project looks like at the end of this video. Fun fact, I'll be adding some pictures of myself as well into this app, and then so that it has more personalized page for me, so that viewers can actually see who I am as well, not just my blogs. All right, so here's my app right here. It's my blog website. Awesome. Cool. About us page. And I actually also asked it to create a portfolio page for me. So it has some of my recent works and videos for a portfolio, and also some blogs posted here. So there we go. Have fun with spec-driven development. Remember, spend most of your time making sure that the requirements and design is fully clear and aligned with your expectations, and use agent skills to help you refine all of that to implement the best practices along the way, and then let it run all tasks and then see what you come up with. Then you'll have less fixing to do at the end, then instead of having to wait till the end and then doing a lot of fixing. Hope that helps. Try it now if you'd like, and please hit like and subscribe. Peace.